The film opens in a drive-in theater where people watch a movie, and one is a man named Harlan. He's an arrogant former soldier, but now he has turned to selling drugs. When Harlan was having a drink with his girlfriend, he suddenly choked. Seeing this, his girlfriend chuckled and advised him to be cautious. However, the arrogant Harlan became enraged and mistreated his girlfriend. A bystander witnessed Harlan mistreating his girlfriend and attempted to intervene. Nevertheless, Harlan disliked others meddling in his affairs, so he promptly assaulted the man. After attacking the man, Harlan departed, leaving his girlfriend alone. Meanwhile, at a metal factory, one of the workers, Russell Bays, has been employed there for 3 years and spends his days working almost daily. On his way home, Russell spotted his younger brother's car parked at a horse racing betting venue. He promptly parked his vehicle and entered to speak with his brother. After entering, Russell asked his brother, Rodney, to step outside and talk with him. Russell inquired about where Rodney acquired his betting funds. At first, Rodney was unwilling to confess. Still, due to persistent questioning, he divulged that he consistently borrowed money from John Petty. He eventually admitted that he owed a substantial sum of money to Petty and couldn't repay it. Upon hearing this, Russell was undeniably frustrated. Still, he deeply cared for his younger brother, so he couldn't bring himself to scold or be impolite. Russell even pledged to assist in repaying Rodney's debt when he received his salary. The next day, Russell wakes up in his room next to his girlfriend, Lena Taylor, and they joke a little about her pregnancy. That day, after ending work, Russell went to his father's residence to see him, who was seriously ill. Russell's father lived with Russell's uncle and Rodney. Evidently, Rodney was a soldier about to be deployed to Iraq. One evening, Russell went to a bar in the town center. He went there to meet with John Petty. While he was about to approach Petty, he overheard someone threatening Petty because Petty refused to participate in the distribution of drugs. The individual who threatened Petty was Harlan, the gang leader. Harlan was a bit irritated with Russell because he suddenly entered rudely. However, Russell mentioned that he also had some business with Petty. After that, Petty inquired about the reason for coming to him. Russell promptly handed over some money to Petty to settle his younger brother's debt. Unfortunately, the amount was insufficient, but Russell pledged to resolve the rest after his next payday. Before leaving, Petty graciously offered him a drink as a token of appreciation for paying off the debt. On his way home, Russell accidentally collided with a car that abruptly passed by, resulting in the death of a child and the mother who were in the car.
Come help.
However, Russell was found guilty on the day of the accident as he had been consuming alcohol, leading to a 3-year prison sentence. One day, Rodney visited Russell in prison, revealing that their father was still unwell and was currently under their uncle's care. Rodney was preparing to depart for Iraq to fulfill his initial duties as a soldier. Upon hearing this, Russell advised his younger brother to prioritize his well-being during his mission in Iraq. He also requested him to continue praying for their father's recovery. A few months later in prison, Russell chose not to mingle with the inmates there as he did not wish to engage in any illicit activities for early release. However, this led some prisoners to consider Russell as haughty and irksome. One day, 2 inmates confronted Russell and attacked him. A year passed, and Rodney visited Russell in prison again after completing his duty in Iraq. He conveyed the sorrowful news that their father had passed away 3 days earlier, prompting Russell to break down in tears. He felt sad and guilty for not being able to care for his father and instead wasting time in prison.
But he was wounded for our transgressions. Our peace was upon him.
2 years later, Russell was eventually released from jail promptly due to his continued good conduct. Rodney warmly welcomed Russell and was prepared to take his brother home. While on the way, Russell asked his brother to stop at their father's grave first. That night, Rodney confided in Russell that he had quit the military because he didn't want to go back to serve in Iraq. Upon hearing this, Russell, as a brother, continued to support Rodney's choice. One day, Russell encountered his ex-love, who was now dating a police officer. Russell still harbors strong feelings for her, but realizes she no longer wants to be with him. After that, Russell returned to his job at the metal factory. Despite being an ex-convict, the factory was still open to hiring him. Meanwhile, Rodney had become involved in street fighting. He turned to this to pay off his debts to Petty. During Russell's time in prison, Rodney frequently borrowed money from Petty. At that point, Rodney should have given up. Still, instead, he continued to fight his rival because the man had disrespected his parents. This action irked Petty, who had bet on Rodney's defeat. Rodney could only apologize for breaking their agreement. He promised Petty that he would settle his debt in another fight. However, Petty believed that Rodney couldn't control his emotions during combat, so he suggested that Rodney work at the metal factory alongside his brother. However, Rodney expressed embarrassment at working as a factory laborer. The next day, Russell found a cloth stained with blood at home. When he saw his brother's hands, he finally realized that Rodney had been street fighting all this time. Russell then implored his younger brother to put an end to it all and suggested that Rodney come work at the factory with him. However, Rodney rejected the idea, stating that he would be embarrassed if he had to work as a factory worker. Rodney also explained that the reason he turned to street fighting was that he had experienced depression after returning from Iraq. The only thing that brought him some solace was fighting. A few days later, Russell resolved to approach Lena, who worked as a kindergarten teacher. Despite still holding affection for her, he mustered the courage to ask her to mend their relationship. However, with a heavy heart, she declined for some undisclosed reason. Russell then inquired whether they spurned him because she no longer cared for him. Lena confesses that she is pregnant, and this dramatically breaks Russell, and eventually, the two experience a tragic separation. Meanwhile, Rodney encountered Petty at his residence. He asked Petty to take him to the Ramapaz to compete in a fight. The Ramapaz is a haven for bandits where illegal prize fights occur. Petty questioned Rodney's motivation to fight at the Ramapaz, but he explained that the prize money could help him settle his debts if he fought there. Upon hearing this, Petty still empathized with Rodney. He cautioned Rodney about the dangerous nature of the fights at the Ramapaz. The organizers often swindled the fighters for their own gain, and many fighters had lost their lives there. However, Rodney remained obstinate and pressured Petty to take him to compete. He seemed utterly indifferent to the risks involved. Eventually, Petty reluctantly agreed to accompany Rodney. He then got in touch with the fight organizer, Harlan. Russell's uncle visited him the following day, inviting him for a hunting trip. Still reeling from heartbreak, Russell promptly accepted the invitation to clear his mind. On the other hand, Rodney departed with Petty, heading to the Ramapaz to meet Harlan. Upon their arrival, Petty introduced Rodney to Harlan as the contestant. However, Harlan underestimated Rodney's abilities slightly, as he didn't appear to be a formidable fighter. Provoked by his emotions, Rodney claimed to be a former soldier. He challenged Harlan to a duel to demonstrate his skills. Harlan questioned Rodney's intentions, asking why a soldier would want to fight against his own people. Rodney's response was that it was all about money. Harlan then requested Rodney to leave as he wished to speak privately with Petty. After striking a deal, Petty returned to Rodney and explained that Rodney needed to throw the match scheduled for that afternoon if he wanted to receive payment. At the same time, Russell and his uncle had just arrived in the forest to hunt. On one occasion, Russell found a deer and immediately aimed at it. However, when he was about to pull the trigger of his gun, suddenly he felt sorry for the deer, so he didn't shoot it. Meanwhile, that afternoon, Rodney was preparing for a fight. Before that, Petty reminded him once again that he had to lose the match, because if Rodney violated this rule, Harlan's gang would harm them both. The fight then began. In the middle of the fight, Rodney was provoked by his opponent, causing him to continue beating him. Seeing this, Petty was worried Rodney would lose control again, so he went downstairs to shout at him. After Petty shouted at him several times, Rodney swallowed his pride. He chose to stay still when attacked by his opponent. Meanwhile, Russell and his uncle were about to return home, but Russell's uncle managed to catch some prey. Rodney was taking a beating despite intentionally losing the match. Still, thankfully, Petty immediately stopped the fight and took Rodney out of the arena to prevent further harm, as he could have been seriously injured or killed. Not long after, Harlan met with Rodney and thanked him for his help during a recent fight in which Rodney almost died. However, Harlan was apparently angered when Petty told him he had settled his debt. That night, Rodney and Petty decided to head home. Due to fear, Petty recorded their conversations as they passed through the Ramapose area. However, bandits ambushed them, one of whom turned out to be Harlan. Harlan asked Petty to come out of the car, but when he refused, Harlan killed him. It was later revealed that Harlan held a grudge against Petty for refusing to cooperate in selling drugs. His henchmen then took Rodney to the forest, where Harlan killed and buried him. Meanwhile, Russell, who was back at home, stumbled upon a letter written by Rodney. In the letter, Rodney apologized to his brother. He said that this was his final fight, and after that, he would work at the mill with Russell. The next day in the morning, Chief Wesley Barnes, Lena's boyfriend, visited Russell. Russell initially thought Wesley would be upset because he asked his ex-girlfriend to return to him the day before. However, it turned out that Wesley wanted to discuss something else, and he promptly took Russell to the police station. At the police station, Wesley informed Russell that Petty was found deceased on a road in the Ramapos area. In contrast, Rodney, who was with Petty then, had still not been found. The police had also found a recording indicating that the perpetrator was Harlan. Unfortunately, people in Ramapos were unwilling to cooperate or disclose Harlan's location. Russell questioned the police's performance, so he saw his uncle. It turns out that Russell wanted to invite his uncle to search for Harlan in Ramapos. That same day, Russell and his uncle were determined to go there. Upon arrival, Russell and his uncle attempted to inquire about Harlan's whereabouts from the locals. Still, unfortunately, they repeatedly claimed that they didn't know. In the evening, Russell went to where the criminals typically congregated. Russell, who was searching for Harlan, pretended to want to purchase narcotics. Initially, they suspected that Russell was a law enforcement officer in disguise. However, fortunately, one of them recognized Russell as a former inmate he had seen in prison. They then brought Russell into their headquarters to provide him with the narcotics. After receiving the goods, Russell asked about Harlan's whereabouts, and suddenly the criminals were astounded because this was Harlan's headquarters. Upon learning where Harlan's headquarters were, Russell quickly moved to devise a plan. However, a policeman approached Russell and his uncle on the way, stating that they had to return home immediately because if Russell became involved, the police would arrest him again. The authorities feared that Russell and his uncle would disrupt the police investigation. The following day, Wesley met with Russell and shared the news that Rodney had been found deceased and buried in a forest. Wesley assured Russell that he and the other authorities would apprehend Harlan. Still, he pleaded with Russell not to take matters into his own hands and to instead hand over the case to the authorities. Russell agreed and disclosed the location of Harlan's hideout, which he had visited the previous night, to Wesley. After that, the authorities attempted to raid Harlan's hideout based on Russell's information. Unfortunately, Harlan and his associates had already fled. Despite several months passing, the authorities were unable to capture Harlan. This infuriated Russell, and he decided to seek vengeance on Harlan. Russell went to Petty's residence to search for Harlan's contact details. Petty's trusted associate, Dean, cautioned Russell against getting involved with Harlan. Despite this, Russell proceeded with his plan and instructed Dean to vacate the premises for 1 week. When Russell managed to find Harlan's number, he immediately called him, asking him to meet at Petty's place at 4 in the morning. Russell planned to buy a large amount of drugs as he had taken all of Petty's money. At 4 in the morning, Harlan and one of his men visited Petty's residence. Russell hid to ambush Harlan and his men. Inside, Harlan met Dean despite Russell warning Dean to leave immediately. When Russell attacked Harlan's man, Harlan killed Dean and attempted to flee. Russell pursued Harlan and a duel ensued. Fortunately, Russell won the duel. He shot Harlan in the leg and then told him to walk. While Harlan was walking, Russell shot him again. Russell told Harlan that he was Rodney's older brother, the person he had killed and buried in the forest. Harlan got up and then walked, hoping that Russell would forgive him. At the same time, Wesley immediately arrived and told Russell not to kill Harlan. Wesley also reminded him that he could go back to prison if he still killed Harlan. However, Russell really wanted to avenge his brother's death, so without thinking twice, he immediately shot Harlan in the head. After all these incidents, it turns out Russell didn't end up in prison because Wesley covered up yesterday's incident as if he was the one who finished off Harlan.